If I jump toward Earth from the ISS, roughly how long will it take me to get there? I don't understand how orbit works either. I assume a straight path down would be impossible and some amount of drift will be involved. Will I even make it to Earth? Disregarding the likelihood of burning up on re-entry. Months. 2 years. Depending on a few factors. If you just jump off the ISS, you're still moving at the same orbital velocity. It would take a good long while for your orbit to decay to the point of atmospheric re-entry, which you already know would kill you. You wouldn't make it very far, and you'd actually run into the ISS half an orbit later. If you apply a downwards impulse to an object in orbit, it now has some vertical speed but its horizontal velocity is unchanged. That means its orbital energy is also unchanged, which just pushes the periapsis closest approach down a bit and the apopsis farthest approach up a bit. For you to change your orbit enough to actually hit Earth, you'd have to jump hard enough to probably splatter you to the inside of your spacesuit from the force. This is why I love Reddit. Literally walked into a convo and now walking out with an orbital mechanics degree. You wouldn't make it to Earth at all. You'd just end up in a new orbit fairly close from a planetary perspective to where you jumped. You have to remember that the ISS is orbiting at 17,900 miles per hour. You'd have to match that speed or get fairly close jumping in the opposite direction of orbit to re-enter Earth. I'll guess your jumping speed is somewhat less than 17,900 miles per hour. The rest of your life. The quickest way to get there would be not down, but backwards. You'd be moving from a fast orbit to a slightly slower orbit. You would spiral down in several decades and burn on re-entry. Go play Kerbal Space Program. It's a ton of fun. And you'll understand orbits better than your average NASA employee. You'll never hit the ground. You'll vaporize on re-entry, contributing to greenhouse gases. Yes. We know you ate last night for dinner. The rest of your life. The question has been asked before. It's 2.5 years. You'll make it down eventually, but don't hold your breath. Or do. It won't make a difference. Haha, I love the little addendum minus the burning up on re-entry. Helluva question, cause outside atmosphere there's no terminal velocity, so it's like what? How good you pushed off maybe. Once you're free falling inside what the answer would be, but I'm curious now lol. To shreds you say? Some amount of drift will be involved. That's the understatement of the century. Yeah, some amount. Like 17,500 miles per hour ground speed. With no possible way of slowing down. You would be drifting until gravity slowly pulled you far enough down to burn to a crisp. Exactly how long it will take is almost impossible to calculate. But I can guarantee you will be in Guinness for having the corpse traveled the farthest before cremation. A few thousand, if not tens of thousands, orbits around the Earth. Probably would take you the rest of your life. Jumping towards the Earth wouldn't actually make you fall to Earth. It would just put you in a slightly wobblier orbit. This sounds strange, because orbital mechanics are really counterintuitive for people used to operating on the ground. So, like all of us, to jump back to Earth you actually need to jump backwards relative to the direction the ISS is moving. But you'd have to reduce your speed by like thousands of miles per hour. So a jump still isn't going to do it. Everyone here answered in the way of a normal jump and that you would stay, and I am going to pretend that you jumped in opposite direction to entirely cancel relative velocity and falling straight into is 408 kilometers above surface, and if you jump from that velocity, I actually couldn't do the math myself as it's hard. So I used some help from a website. It would take about 6 minutes to fall and hit the Earth. Think of it like this. While you are in the ISS, you are falling towards Earth while moving sideways fast enough that you miss the Earth. This is an orbit. Pushing off towards Earth will slightly change how fast you are falling to Earth, but will not change how fast you are moving sideways. So you will be back on a slightly more elliptical orbit. You would need to push tangential to Earth in the opposite direction the ISS is moving to slow yourself down. The ISS is moving at 17,500 miles per hour, so you would need to push really hard. Source: I've played KSP, so I'm kinda an expert. If you ignore drag, it would take you forever. Orbit is not like a platform in a video game you can jump off of and then be not in orbit. Rather, it's a trajectory. Like being in collision course with an asteroid. If you jump off of it, you'll still splat into the asteroid just a bit to the right or whatever. Same here. Paging R, they did the math. I think he means if you push down from the ISS. Like standing upside down facing the Earth and jumping. I figure much faster than orbital decay, as you're applying a vector going directly into the planet. Edit NVM, it would only make the orbit elliptical. The ISS is in a low orbit, and its orbit slowly decays, and without boosting it up, it will eventually fall to Earth. If you jump off it, then you will also orbit the Earth for a while. But your orbit will also slowly decay, and eventually you will reach a thicker part of the atmosphere and burn up. Even if you were strong enough to reduce the kinetic energy you have in the orbit enough to get into the atmosphere, you would burn to dust in a moment. Grin. Pretty sure you'd burn up into nothing. You wouldn't. You would eternally orbit the Earth at slightly lower orbit than the ISS. You would not fall at all. If you jumped off the ISS, you'd just float around the Earth's orbit at thousands miles per second like the ISS does itself. That's why space junk circles the Earth and doesn't just all fall in. Most likely skip off the atmosphere, like a rock on a pond, but you end up in outer space orbiting the Sun. You wouldn't. You'd burn up in re-entry. Several months to a year or so, depending on the altitude of the ISS and the solar activity at the time. To be clear, you aren't jumping to Earth. That's not possible. You can't get enough velocity to deorbit just by pushing off something. Here, you're pushing off the space station and into a slightly different orbit, and then just waiting for your orbit to decay, at which point you'll re-enter the atmosphere and burn up. You would burn up when you hit the atmosphere. You'll die before you even get close. The almost space jumps of just over 30 kilometers set by a few people in history, they fell for around 4.5 minutes. ISS at its lowest point is 370 kilometers. If it worked the same or was linear progression, which it's not, it would take around 54 minutes or roughly an hour. How long it really takes IDK. If you jump from the ISS, you'll never reach the Earth. Your body with burn up on re-entry. It is very unpredictable, depending on the velocity relative to ISS you are able to get, and the direction of that velocity. If you don't do it right, you will disappear into the void spare. ISS is orbiting relatively low, and does need to correct its orbit from time to time. So even if you just leave ISS at the right time, you will hit Earth at some point. You could jump with a parachute. You just have to pull it at the correct altitude. This is dumb person math, but the ISS is like 250 miles away. PPL fall at like 120 miles per hour. So a bit over 2 hours if you discount all the space science burning up orbits and shit.